I worked double shifts for 11 years. Every Saturday, every holiday, every birthday that wasn't mine. I did it for 2 kids who weren't even my own children, and I'd do it again without a second of hesitation. My name is Walter, and I'm 63 years old. I live in a 2-bedroom house on the edge of Clarksburg, West Virginia. On a piece of land my father left me when he passed. I spent 30 years as a finished carpenter, building things meant to last. Cabinets, staircases, front porches that families gather on for generations. I believed in things that hold together. I believed people were the same way. I was wrong about at least one of them. My son, the one I raised, the one I drove to every baseball practice and every school play and every emergency room visit. He left his 2 children on my doorstep. On a Thursday evening in October, 11 years ago, he told me he needed 2 weeks. He said he was going through something. He said his girlfriend's situation was complicated and he just needed a little time to sort it all out. He had a bag in each hand, one for each of his kids, and he set them down on my porch like pieces of luggage. My grandson, Caleb, was 6 years old. My granddaughter, Lily, was 4. My son looked at me and said, "Pop, you're the only one I trust with them." Then he got in his car and drove away. The 2 weeks became a month. The month became 3. By spring, I had enrolled Caleb in 1st grade at Clarksburg Elementary and signed Lily up for the preschool program at the community center on Palmer Street. I filled out the emergency contact forms. I attended the parent-teacher conferences. I learned how to braid hair badly at first, then better, because Lily refused to go to school without her hair braided, and I was not going to let that little girl go anywhere feeling like she wasn't cared for. I called my son 14 times in the first 6 months. He answered twice. The first time, he told me things were still complicated. The second time, he told me he'd met someone, a woman named Denise. He said she was wonderful. He said she didn't really get along with kids, but that he was working on it. He said give him a little more time. I gave him time. I gave him 11 years. My neighbor, Gordon, a 70-year-old retired electrician who lived 3 houses down and had nothing better to do than drink coffee on his front porch and argue with the television, became my closest ally during those years. He was the one who helped me when Lily had her appendix scare in 2nd grade, and I didn't have anyone to stay with Caleb. He's the one who drove us to school during the ice storm of 2019 because my truck wouldn't start and the kids couldn't miss their state testing. Gordon was widowed, stubborn as a fence post, and absolutely devoted to those 2 children in the way that old men with too much time and too much love sometimes become devoted to things that need them. I never went to court to formalize anything. My son never called to check in. The school knew me. The pediatrician knew me. Every teacher, every coach, every Sunday school volunteer at First Methodist knew those children lived with me and had lived with me since they were small. There was no ambiguity in Clarksburg about who those kids belonged to. Everybody knew. What I didn't know was what was being built 3 states away. I found out on a Monday morning in late January. Caleb was 17 by then, a junior in high school, already talking to community college recruiters about a welding program. Lily was 15, sharp as a tack, playing varsity soccer and reading novels 3 grades above her level. They were good kids, remarkable kids, honestly, the kind that make you feel like maybe you did something right. I was in my workshop behind the house, finishing a cabinet order for a family in Bridgeport, when a car I didn't recognize pulled into the driveway. 2 people got out. A man in a suit I'd never seen before, and my son. I hadn't seen my son in 9 years. He'd aged in ways I hadn't expected. Thinner, better dressed than I remembered. His hair was cut close on the sides the way younger men wear it now. He looked like someone who had recently been taught how to look successful. The man in the suit introduced himself as an attorney. I wiped sawdust off my hands and waited. My son didn't look me in the eye. He looked at the ground, then at the attorney, then at some middle distance between us. The attorney did all the talking. He said my son and his wife Denise, whom I'd heard about exactly once 11 years ago, had decided they were ready to have his children come live with them. He said they had a home in Charlotte, North Carolina. They had a yard. My son had a stable job in logistics management. Denise worked in pharmaceutical sales. They were prepared to offer the children a good life. I said, "They already have a good life." The attorney said they were prepared to take legal action if necessary. He said the children had been in my care without any formal custody arrangement, which meant, technically, my son retained full parental rights, and I had no legal standing whatsoever. I looked at my son and said, "Caleb has a meeting with a welding recruiter on Thursday. Lily has a soccer tournament this weekend. Do you even know what grade they're in?" He said nothing. The attorney handed me a document. It was a notice of intent to petition for return of the minor children to the custodial parent. I had 30 days to respond before they filed formally. After they left, I stood in my driveway for a long time. Then I went inside and I called Gordon. He came over in 12 minutes. He sat at my kitchen table and read the document twice. Then he set it down and said, "Walter, these people didn't come back for those kids. Nobody disappears for 11 years and then comes back for the kids. They came back for something else." I didn't understand what he meant yet, but I would. That evening, I sat down with Caleb and Lily. I told them the truth that their father had come by, that he wanted them to move to Charlotte, and that I was going to fight it. Caleb went very quiet the way he does when something is serious. He's always been like that, processing before he speaks, taking his time. Then he looked at me and said, "Pop, I'm not going anywhere. And I'm old enough to say that to a judge." Lily said, "He doesn't even know my middle name." She was right. He didn't. I found a family law attorney in Morgantown, a woman named Patricia, who had been doing custody work for 22 years, and who, when I laid out the situation, leaned back in her chair and said, "This is more common than you'd think, and it's uglier than most people realize." She told me that without a formal guardianship order, I was vulnerable. She told me I needed to start gathering documentation immediately. Medical records, school records, any correspondence showing my son had been absent and aware of it. She told me time was not my friend. I went home and started pulling boxes from the closet shelf. 11 years of school pictures, report cards, doctor, visit summaries, permission slips, birthday cards the kids had made for me, crayoned and construction papered, and completely priceless. 11 years of being their person. But something else happened that week that changed everything. Gordon called me on a Wednesday night. He sounded different, careful, like he was measuring his words. He said, "Walter, I need to tell you something, and you need to not get emotional about it until I finish." He told me that Denise's mother owned a significant piece of commercial property in Charlotte that was set to pass to Denise upon the mother's death. The mother was in her 80s and in declining health. He'd found this through public property records, which are available to anyone who knows how to look. But more importantly, Gordon told me he'd remembered something. A conversation, 4 years ago, with a man he'd met at a hardware store in town, a man who'd turned out to be distantly connected to my son's social circle. This man had said, offhand, that my son's wife didn't want children in the house permanently, but that having legal custody of minors could, in certain estate planning arrangements, affect inheritance distribution favorably. I didn't fully understand the legal mechanics of it, but I understood the outline. My grandchildren were not wanted. They were useful. What Gordon said next, I wasn't prepared for. He said that a few years back, before he understood any of this, he'd had a conversation with my son on the phone. My son had called Gordon's number by mistake, looking for mine, and they'd ended up talking for almost 20 minutes. Gordon had a habit of recording calls. He was hard of hearing and used the recordings to go back and catch things he'd missed. He had that conversation saved on his old phone, which was sitting in a drawer in his bedroom. He'd listened to it again after I told him about the attorney's visit. My son, in that call, had talked about the kids. He'd said, and Gordon read this to me carefully, that the children were with my father, where they're better off, and that he wasn't in a position to be a parent right now, or probably for the foreseeable future. I asked Gordon to save that recording and not tell anyone about it. He said, "Walter, I already know that. I'm old. Not stupid." The next few weeks were the worst of my life. My son's attorney filed the formal petition. A family court date was set. And then, and this was the part I hadn't expected, the children's school was contacted by my son's legal team, requesting records. The principal of Clarksburg Elementary, A woman who had known Caleb since first grade called me personally to let me know. She said, "Mr. Walter, I want you to know that this school's records are going to tell a very clear story." I also got a call from Dr. Harmon, the kid's pediatrician, who had been treating them since Lily was 4 years old. He said the same thing. He said if there was a court proceeding and he was asked to provide records or testimony, he would provide them fully and accurately. He said in his professional opinion, those children had been in a stable, nurturing home environment for the entirety of his care for them. Lily's soccer coach called. 3 of Caleb's teachers reached out through Patricia. The community center director wrote a letter without being asked. In Clarksburg, apparently, everybody knew. But my son's attorney was sharp. At the preliminary hearing, he argued that the length of the informal arrangement actually demonstrated a pattern of negligence on my part, that I had failed to pursue legal guardianship, creating an unstable situation for the children. He argued that my son, as the biological parent, had every right to reclaim custody, and that my attachment to the children, however genuine, did not override parental rights. The judge, a careful man named Harkins, listened to all of it. He said he would need to speak with the children individually, in chambers, before proceeding. That was the moment Caleb had been waiting for. I don't know exactly what Caleb said to Judge Harkins that afternoon. Caleb didn't tell me everything, and I didn't push. What I know is that he was in those chambers for 45 minutes, which Patricia told me was a very long time for a preliminary juvenile interview. When he came out, his face was calm. He came and sat next to me and put his hand on my arm the way his mother used to when she wanted me to know things were going to be okay. His mother, my son's ex, had died of a pulmonary embolism when Lily was 2, which was part of what had unraveled my son to begin with. That grief was real. I had never stopped believing that, but grief doesn't buy 11 years. Lily's session was 30 minutes. She came out looking like she'd been waiting her whole life to say something, and had finally said it. The hearing was continued for 2 weeks pending the judge's review. During that stretch, my son's attorney made a move I didn't anticipate. He contacted Gordon. I don't know how they identified Gordon as someone connected to me, perhaps through records, perhaps through asking around town, but they called him and, according to Gordon, the attorney was polite and professional and asked if Gordon would be willing to speak with them about his observations of the children's home life. Gordon said he'd think about it. Then he called me. He said, "Walter, they're going to try to make me a witness for their side. They think I'll say something that helps them." I said, "What are you going to do?" He said, "I'm going to give Patricia the recording." The morning of the final hearing, I woke up at 4:30 and couldn't go back to sleep. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table in the dark. Caleb came downstairs at 6. He'd heard me moving around, I think, and he sat with me without saying anything for a while. Then he said, "Pop, I've been thinking about something." I said, "What's that?" He said, "Even if something goes wrong today, even if it doesn't work out, I'm 17. In 8 months, I'm 18 and nobody decides anything for me anymore. And the first thing I'm going to do when I'm 18 is come right back here." I had to look out the window for a minute. I said, "Nothing's going wrong today." In the courtroom that morning, my son sat with his attorney and Denise, who had come from Charlotte, and who looked exactly like what Gordon had described, composed, well-dressed, present, in the way that people are present when they're performing presence. She had never met Caleb. She had never met Lily. She sat 3 feet from my grandchildren and did not look at them once. Patricia presented the school records first. 11 years. Perfect attendance stretches. Honor roll. Awards. Individualized education notes. Progress reports. Teacher commendations. The principal had submitted a formal letter. Dr. Harmon had submitted records and a written statement. The soccer coach had submitted a letter. The community center director had submitted a letter. Then Patricia introduced the recording. My son's attorney objected on multiple grounds. Judge Harkins listened to all of it. He listened to the recording. The courtroom was very quiet during that part. My son's voice came through the speaker, younger, tired, unmistakable, saying the children were with his father, where they were better off, and that he was not in a position to be a parent for the foreseeable future. The recording was dated 4 years ago, which meant it wasn't from the early confused period after he left. It was recent. It was deliberate. It was him, at a time when he could have come back. choosing not to, and saying so out loud. Judge Harkins looked at my son over the top of his glasses for a long moment. Then he looked at the attorney and said, "Counsel, I've heard from the children. I've reviewed the documentation. I've heard this recording. What I have not heard is any compelling argument for why uprooting two teenagers from a stable, loving home, their school, their community, and the only consistent parental figure they have known for 11 years serves their best interest. That is the standard. Not parental rights in the abstract. Best interest of the children." My son's attorney began to speak. Judge Harkins held up one hand. Then he looked at my son directly and said, "Sir, do you know what grade your daughter is in?" My son opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Denise. Judge Harkins said, "Thank you. That's all I needed." He awarded me formal legal guardianship of both children, with a supervised visitation framework offered to my son if he chose to pursue it. He referred the case to the state bar for a review of certain billing practices by my son's attorney, based on a pattern Patricia had documented. And he said, for the record, that in 21 years on the bench, he had rarely seen a community show up for a child the way Clarksburg had shown up that day. On the way out of the courthouse, Lily took my hand on one side and Caleb walked on the other, and Gordon was waiting on the steps in his good coat, the one he only wore to funerals and apparently to custody hearings. And when he saw us come out, he raised both arms like we'd just scored. I took Gordon to dinner that night at the steakhouse on Route 50 that he'd been talking about going to for 3 years but never actually went to. I told him to order anything on the menu. He ordered the largest steak they had and a slice of pie and ate every bite. And then he told me about his wife, Eleanor, who had passed in 2009, and how she would have loved Caleb and Lily, and how he thought about her every time he watched them grow up from his porch. I gave Gordon an envelope at the end of dinner. He tried to hand it back. I told him it wasn't a negotiation. He opened it. He looked at the number. He looked at me. I said, "You saved my family, Gordon. That's not a small thing." He folded it back up and put it in his breast pocket and didn't say anything for a minute. Then he said, "Eleanor would have liked you, Walter. She had good taste." My son never pursued the visitation option. I don't know what happened with Denise and the property in Charlotte and whatever arrangement they'd constructed their lives around. I don't think about it much. What I think about is this. Caleb started his welding certification program in the fall. He has his grandfather's hands, careful, patient, built for precision. Lily made the all-state soccer list and is reading applications for universities with environmental science programs. She wants to study water quality. She says clean water is a human right. She says it like it's obvious, because to her it is. Some Saturday mornings Gordon comes over and we drink coffee on the back porch and don't say much. The workshop is open, and there's usually something in progress, a cabinet, a set of shelves, a small repair job for someone in the neighborhood. Caleb comes out sometimes and watches. He started asking questions about joinery and wood grain. I answer every single one. There are people who leave, and there are people who stay. I know which kind I am. I know which kind Gordon is. And watching those two kids build their lives, I absolutely know which kind they're becoming. That is everything. That is the whole of it. Everything I worked for, and everything I'd work for again.